Hello, and welcome to Habits in Healthspan and Amway Podcast, where we sit down with experts to talk about all things Healthspan. My name is John, and I am joined by my amazing co-host, Alyssa. Hey, Alyssa.
Hey, John. How's it going?
Fantastic, as always. Super excited to talk with our amazing guest today.
Yes, who we will introduce in just a moment. Before we do, John, I need your help.
I'm all ears. How can I help?
So I'm a mom. I have 3 kids. My oldest is 14. He's a 14-year-old man-child, right? Okay, so he's starting to do things that I really just don't understand, and I look to my husband about it as well, but I'm curious, when you were 14, if you can remember, yesterday we served a meal, we had family with us, and my son's plate consisted of steak, and steak, and steak, and steak, a little bit of ketchup, steak. Is this normal? Do you remember doing this? And is this okay for him as a 14-year-old boy?
I can't speak to the latter, but I can speak to the former. There is something deep in the heart of teenage boys that says grill is a sacred place.
Got it.
And steak is a sacred food. Okay. There's something about that. I remember this when I was a teenager. We go, guys, we're going to get the grill. We're going to get some steak. And you're like, oh yeah, we're being like men now. And there's something that's really kind of like transitionally like that in that period. At least it was for me and my friends.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad to know that he's not completely,
Well, I'm glad that I could help with the first part of that question. But in terms about what's actually good for men's health, we can't look to me. We're going to have to look over here to our friend over here. We have Dr. Michael Regowski. He is the senior scientist and clinical investigator with Amway. Mm-hmm. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm happy to talk health and wellness with anyone who's willing to listen.
Amazing. So tell us a little bit about your background, a little bit about yourself.
My PhD is in nutrition science. I actually have a master's and a bachelor's in exercise physiology. So this is all is my wheelhouse, anything related to health and physiology. And my role as a clinical investigator at the R&D division of Amway is really on the claim substantiation side. So anytime that we make a claim on a product, what those benefits are, we have to substantiate that with some scientific proof points. And my role as a clinical investigator is to come up with a testing plan for that, as well as documenting that information if that were to ever be challenged. But also so that marketing can go over and use those to tell you about the benefits of these products.
It really sounds like you keep yourself busy with all these things that you're working on, but it seems like you also have some extracurriculars that we were hearing about.
Yes.
It's true that you're a world record holder with a couple things.
Yeah, so I am a very avid lifter. I compete in grip strength competitions.
Amazing.
I also moonlight as a performing strongman, those guys that bend steel bars and rip decks of cards. I have a couple world records in my weight class for grip strength and stuff. So
Remarkable. Can we get a phone book over here?
It's 2025. They don't.
I still know what a phone book is.
Amazing, Michael. So right off the bat, all steak diet? Yes, no?
Probably not a good idea. I would say, is it typical for teenage boys? Probably. Is it normal? Well, let's just say it's typical.
Okay.
But I would say something that, for young men, I say younger children, I would say as well, too, it's important to keep reintroducing foods, even if they haven't liked it in the past. Food preferences can change, palates mature. And so hopefully that's a gateway to maybe eating more vegetables instead of only steak.
Yes, that's, I will say for his sake, he has really, he's a big fan of salad also.
Mm-hmm.
It just happened to be completely absent from his plate yesterday. So,
well, I know that I had a lot to learn from when I was on the all steak diet at 14. Well, also some chips too, and lots of soda pop. But I'd love to talk about first sort of this foundational health standard for men. What are some of the main ideas that we need to keep in mind for men across the board in terms of what it means to be healthy?
Yeah, so I think with men, there's some unique considerations, but there's also some that are obviously universal to everyone, but maybe just need more of an emphasis in men's health. And I think of foundational health. One of the first things I would say is adequate nutrition. So both from micronutrient perspective and macronutrient perspective. They're obviously very related, but there's different considerations for each one.
Really quick, just in layman's terms, micronutrient versus macronutrient?
Yeah, so a micronutrient would be like your vitamins and your minerals. They're essential nutrients needed in very small quantities, milligrams, micrograms, something like that. Macronutrition refers to like your carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So the main nutrients for energy that are needed in relatively large amounts.
Awesome. Thanks for defining. So, as you were saying about the main ideas.
Yeah, and so another concept of that is hydration. So hydration isn't just making sure you're drinking water, it's also about electrolyte replacement and fluid balance. Another aspect I would say is sun protection. Men have a much higher rates of jobs that are outside, so that's an important consideration for a large swath of men that maybe they're not thinking about. Physical activity is another one. It's obviously important for everyone, but I know too, men tend to be less conscious about their weight, so that's another aspect of maybe they should add in more physical activity than what they're currently doing, as well as too, physical activity is important for maintaining muscle mass and mobility. And just because maybe you have a more physical job, you can still be stiff at the end of the day. So even if you're tired and exhausted, there's still maybe a little bit more you need to be doing, even if you do, work hard all day.
So I'm hearing a lot of it's about your diet, it's about your hydration, it's about your exercise, keeping track of that general upkeep, but also how it specifically relates to what people's individual lives are like as they're going through it.
Yeah, and what I always say for people, especially when it comes to physical activity, the best form of physical activity is the one that you will actually do. The best diet is probably the one you will actually be able to follow. Maybe not the all-steak diet. That's probably a little too easy to follow, but one that maybe you'll actually follow through in terms of incorporating foods that you can actually, tolerate.
So we hear about different factors like jobs that men might have or their nutrition, other things that they can control. What would you say are related to men's health in terms of their genetics?
Yeah, so the main thing with men's health and how genetics influences, certain health outcomes obviously has to do with the amount of androgen hormones that men have relative to women. So some of the benefits of that are increased muscle mass, obviously. So maybe they're not as prone to, say, something like osteoporosis because it also helps with building up connective tissue like bones are. And then, the increased muscle mass, obviously the muscles pull on the bone. They help make and build up that bone from that stress. But it also comes with increased risk of, say, like cardiovascular disease. That gap tends to close after menopause for women, but up to that point, men do have a higher risk for those kind of outcomes. The excess, or I should say, higher levels of androgen can come into play with certain skin conditions, say like acne, adult acne. There's processes related to androgens that cause men's skin to be more oily. That also causes much higher prevalence of, say, something like dandruff. In some sense, though, it can make things like maybe like fitness and weight loss a little bit more easy, just because there's more lean mass to work with. It's easier to burn more calories with regards to that. And like I said, maintaining that muscle mass helps with maintaining activities of daily living as you get older, which is a key health outcome. At the same time, I think, some men tend to gravitate that maybe a little too much, and they might neglect their cardiovascular health, which, as we said, is kind of one of those genetic, problem areas that men might want to do a little bit extra to kind of mitigate.
Well, it sounds like there's a whole bunch that we can really get into with all this. So let's focus in on one of these first ideas that we brought up today, which is nutrition. Obviously, we've heard about the all-steak diet. I myself have had to fill quite a few gaps since I was at that stage, but I'm still refining and adding more things to my kitchen to try to address certain places that maybe my diet isn't as robust and full as maybe it should be. Can you speak to some common gaps that men might be facing in the nutrition?
Taste is the primary driver of food consumption. Let's be real, no matter how health conscious you are. So if you're a steak and potatoes person, it can be hard to get those green leafy vegetables in and meet some of those dietary shortfalls. Something I would say, just to kind of start off, as a unique nutrition consideration for men is iron, in that they tend to get too much of it because you might notice in some men's multivitamins, they either don't have iron or they might not have a lot. Part of that is that women, with their monthly cycle, that their body gets rid of a lot of iron through that process. With men, it can continue to build up. So especially if they eat a lot of red meat. The way you can mitigate that risk is, once a quarter or so, donate blood. It helps people out, and that can help you out if you're accumulating too much. So that's something to keep in mind with some of these certain minerals like iron, zinc, and selenium. You can get too much of them. You don't want to megadose on them like, people do with vitamin C. If you have too much vitamin C, maybe you get a little tummy ache. But the problem corrects itself, not so with iron. So that's something to keep in mind. I think most people aren't like at risk for that, but that is something that men can actually get too much of. The other, I think, big kind of shortfalls that people tend to have, vitamin D. I think that's kind of more universal across the board, but it might not be as big a factor for men that work jobs outside. But then again, at the same time, when you're working an outside job, usually you're covered head to toe, either because you don't want to get dirty or there's something abrading you. So even if you work outside, maybe you're not getting a lot of light exposure for vitamin D. So vitamin D is very important. There's about 900 genes in your body that are regulated by the vitamin D receptor, and it's very important for immunity. Calcium and magnesium are some ones that I think are important, just because typically if you're not consuming, say, something like dairy products, you might not be getting enough, and that's because these minerals are bulky. They take up a lot of space. So a lot of people, I think, feel like they're meeting their nutrition gaps with this tiny little multivitamin that they take once a week. But if you look at, quality calcium and magnesium supplements, those pills are fairly decent size, and they might only have like 30% of your daily value in them. So these nutrients, they take up space. So if you're supplementing with a quality supplement, it'll take a little bit more than a tiny little pill once a week. Another nutrient that I think gets overlooked is choline. That's a relatively new nutrient in terms of like it just got an RDA, I want to say a few years ago, although it's probably been more than a few now.
Yeah, this is the first I'm hearing about it.
Yeah,
Oh
me
yeah,
too.
yeah. So it's new, and that's a nutrient that it's really kind of in like your phospholipids that make up your cell membranes. It's important for brain health, and most people that don't regularly eat eggs are probably not getting enough. Omega-3 fatty acids, that's another nutrient where I think a lot of men fall short, especially if they're not consuming like fatty ocean fish, regularly, probably about like 3 times a week, especially if they're, more of a steak eater and not so much fish in their diet. I think that's a common problem with men.
All right, so there's iron, magnesium, calcium, vitamin D, the new one, choline,
Yep.
omega-3, all these great nutrients. Here's my question. You did a really great job filling us in on what they all do, where we can get them, these type of things. I'd love to know specifically with certain issues that are going to pertain to men as they're getting older. I have to admit, I have a vested interest in this question. So I'm thinking things like metabolism, how that's changing for me as I get older from when I was 14, or my muscle mass, or even like hormonal health. Can you speak to how these nutrients are interacting with some of those specifically male issues?
I think one of the things that there's some misconception, or maybe it's a scapegoat, as people talk about their metabolism, like, oh, my metabolism isn't what it used to be. Well, your metabolism is mostly mediated by the amount of lean body mass that you have. That's the primary driver. So realistically, what's happening, and compared to when you were 14, is your body was still growing. So your energy expenditure per unit of lean body mass is higher, because obviously a lot of that energy is being directed into growth. Once you reach about like your early 20s, that kind of now plateaus. That's where you get like the freshman 15, because people are eating like they're growing teenagers, and then they become growing adults, but out instead of up. So that's when your metabolism kind of stabilizes, and it really doesn't start to kind of decline until maybe your late 50s. We're talking per unit of lean body mass. So a lot of this slower metabolism is actually more attributed to maybe a decline in physical activity and losing that lean body mass. So that's why activity is important, to maintain that and to help maintain the healthier metabolism.
And it seems like that would relate directly to muscle mass as well then.
Yes, and so that's where an important consideration for men as they get older compared to when they were younger is protein consumption. And what happens is as we get older is that our bodies are less sensitive to the amount of protein that we intake relative to how much that stimulates muscle protein synthesis. And so when you're young, a relatively small amount of protein can stimulate muscle protein synthesis, basically to its maximum. What they found is as men get older, say like over 40, it takes more protein. And so that's why with some of the nutrition requirements for advanced aging, they actually recommend more protein, provided there's not some kind of underlying, kidney condition or something. But they advise more protein because the people with the highest quartiles or tertiles of protein consumption tend to preserve much more muscle mass into their post 70s.
So I really do love having a teenage boy, but I'm curious, can you speak to a little bit about how hormonal health plays a role in men's nutrition also, because I'm just super curious.
Yeah, with hormonal health, it's kind of one of those things where a lot of that's genetic, like how much, how high your testosterone levels are. One of the things that can maybe like suppress that is people that, if you're severely overweight, that tends to suppress testosterone levels that can affect things like, mood or your ability to lose weight. Adequate sleep is important for hormonal health. I think that's something that gets overlooked. As you mentioned, kind of like with your son, that's kind of one of the first things people kind of put to the side when maybe it's their hobbies or other things they'd rather be doing.
Mm-hmm.
Alcohol consumption is another thing that can suppress, protein synthesis or recovery from, say, like working out. Obviously, it's fine to have, one or two now and then, but obviously you don't want to drink to excess.
And not for my 14-year-old.
And not for your 14-year-old.
But, right,
Yes. Not that any of them ever do that. But, it's obviously important. Just something to keep in mind, moderation and stuff. And I think too, there's this, I guess, this conception too, like, men eat more protein. They like to eat red meat. And obviously protein's important for men's health, maintaining that muscle mass. But obviously, you can't grow and develop properly if you don't have those micronutrients. A lot of these micronutrients are what we call cofactors. So essentially, like the pieces needed for these enzymes that run the reactions in our metabolism. And if you don't have those, then you don't build up adequate protein. You don't have adequate bone remodeling. And so that's why all of that really helps contribute to, a hormonal balance in your body.
I appreciate hearing about some of the misconceptions that I think are generally adopted as far as like nutrition and maybe too much protein, but not enough iron, or too much iron, right? I'm going to the woman's side of things. But I'm wondering what other different areas of men's health are often overlooked?
Yeah, I think an area that's often overlooked in men is skin health. So I think cosmetics and cosmetic treatments are usually seen more geared towards women. But I would say to men, like, you go out of your way to, maybe remove something from your diet, don't have that dessert, maybe even try to exercise more. Those are hard decisions to make. Rubbing something on your face every morning is a very easy thing to do. And it's something that can help you look younger than you are anyway. And it has a cumulative effect over time. So I think most men aren't really doing anything active for their skin health, so they stand to benefit, quite a bit. And skin health doesn't have to be like this super expensive serum. The most basic thing you can probably do is like some SPF. You don't want to use like beach sunscreen on your face every day and have this white cast on it. But there are sunscreens made specifically for everyday facial use that I would recommend, because that's what's, and that's how people perceive your age, is the appearance of your face. But sometimes it's things just as simple as wearing a hat on a sunny day. Make sure you don't burn the top of your head.
Well, that's one thing I've certainly really enjoyed from all these episodes. Listeners, if you haven't checked it out, check out our skin health episode. That is the one that, I'm telling you, Michael, that caused me to start daily moisturizing. I'll be honest, I wasn't doing it prior. This podcast has been so good for my health span. Are there any other areas, aside from skin health, that men often overlook?
Yeah, I would say one area I think in particular is mobility. So flexibility, balance. I think those get some emphasis a lot in women's health, but I think it's important for men too, because, if you have a very physically demanding job, either you're usually bent over a lot or you're standing a lot. And that creates stiffness in your back and your hips. So some specific mobility work can be good so you're not stiff at the end of the day, and maintaining that range of motion as you get older. Because if you don't, your body kind of tightens up and twists itself. In that kind of line that's maybe overlooked is mental stimulation, making sure that you have some active hobbies that involve, say, problem solving, or just engage your brain more, like reading. I say that as I see, I think of my father and, some people of his generation. They didn't really have a lot of hobbies outside of maybe their job. And so then when they retired, it's just kind of like, okay, well, what's on TV? So
Yes.
we want to make sure that we're cultivating these kind of active, mentally stimulating processes and activities outside of just our job, even if we do have a physically demanding job.
I think that'd be a good segue to hear you talk a little bit about stress and energy levels and how that relates to mental health in men.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think a lot of people are kind of aware of, like, when they hear stress, they think the hormone cortisol. That's the common stress hormone. It's kind of really like the bad guy of that. Oh, we got to reduce cortisol levels. Your cortisol is actually it's a good thing. It's one of those things you don't want it to be on all the time. So it does a lot of different things in your body. It's really a glucocorticoid hormone. That basically means it helps regulate things like glucose and protein metabolism. What you want to have happen is you kind of have this big, pulse of it, and then it goes back down. And that's one of the things that it peaks right before you wake up. And that's kind of your body's signal, hey, it's time to wake up. And then it goes back down. So it syncs your circadian rhythm. So that's very important. The problems come about is that when the levels of it are chronically elevated, so throughout the day, that's going to blunt that peak that you need to help sync your circadian rhythm. But also, because it's a stress hormone, it's your body's response to try to up its energy levels for its immediate needs. So it's going to be activating glucose to be more available in the bloodstream, but it's also activating your protein stores to be available, which is useful for, say, like an immune response or something like that. But this is why if you're under stress conditions, chronically, you develop muscle wasting. And that's actually a component to, say, some of these muscle wasting conditions in disease states or in the elderly. So we want to make sure that those cortisol levels are basically in these like discrete intervals that help our bodies sync themselves and really otherwise be relatively low.
So, what would be a specific action that I could take to help reduce those cortisol levels?
Yeah, so I think a good practice of that is getting more sleep and addressing things that are interfering with sleep. So, for instance, if during the summer,
blue light screen.
yeah, before using, say, like blue light filtering glasses when you're at your computer, especially towards the end at night. That's because basically what's supposed to be happening is you're getting less light coming in, and it helps your body signal through melatonin that it's time to go to bed. When in our world that's surrounded by artificial light, that signal isn't really as strong. Other things that are common for men, like snoring, that could be indicative of something like sleep apnea. That interferes with your body's ability to get deep sleep, and so it never really kind of recovers from that. I would say active tone that your body uses to maintain, I would say ambulatory activity throughout the day. So if you're not going through these cycles of rest and recovery, your body never really gets the chance to recover.
So you said muscle wasting? I don't know if that's a term that I've heard before. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's actually a term that's brought up. There's a technical term for it called cachexia.
Well, I haven't heard that one either.
Is another aspect of it too.
Okay.
It depends. There's a couple of different muscle wasting conditions. But essentially, how it relates to cortisol is if you have a chronically high levels of stress, like I said, it's basically in order to activate those protein reserves, your body draws that from muscle. Like that's your primary reservoir of protein in your body. And in an acute response, that's actually really important for your immune cells and their reaction to, say, an infection, because the immune cells need to multiply from a small pool of cells to like a thousand fold. So they have to multiply really quickly. So that's why that's activated. But if that's on all the time, your muscle reservoirs start to waste. And so certain long-term diseases like heart failure, like kidney failure, that causes muscle wasting because these processes are active in that chronic condition. Now, so that now what it translates for most people day to day is that's why you will notice somebody not looking so good if they're chronically stressed. They look kind of haggard, they look a little gaunt, and then compared to what you're used to, that's what's really going on.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. What about exercise when it comes to dealing with stress?
Yeah, exercise and stress. I should say, exercise is a good response to managing stress, because what's happening when you have like these higher cortisol levels is that basically your body is under stress, but it doesn't have anything really to direct it to. And when you exercise, you're giving your body what's called a eustress. So a eustress means like it's a good type of stress, and that's what exercise is. There's a discrete time interval where you're increasing the demands on your body, and then it stops and you're able to recover. The problem with stress, in terms of like chronic stress, is you have this stressor that's happening all the time, and there's no initiation of this recovery phase that's supposed to happen in response to a stressor.
All right. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about skin health for men, and specifically like donating blood to reduce our iron count. Like,
I do it.
that's great. I hadn't heard that before. We talked about nutrition. We talked about exercise. We talked about supplementation, whether it be, everything from like zinc and vitamins to caffeine and what those things will do to your body. We talked about sleep. So here's our big question. And I believe that you're ready for it because you're a world record holder, right? Yeah. So here's the heavy lift for today. Okay. If you had to tell men one thing, one habit to start that would, in your mind, be the best thing that they could do for their foundational men's health, what would be one thing that you would say to do?
So the thing that I would recommend to men is making sure you're getting adequate sleep. And what adequate sleep is for most people is 7 hours a night. Now, I know the problem with that is that sleep is like the first thing to go in terms of like if you had a stressful day, you feel crunched for time, you have projects, or maybe, you have young kids, they have to get up in the morning, you have to get them off to the school. Maybe, you work 12-hour shifts and there's not much time for much else. But what I would propose is something to understand is the concept of sleep latency. So sleep latency is the time between when you put your head down for bed and when you actually fall asleep. For a healthy amount of sleep latency is 15 minutes. If you fall asleep too short, that means you're overtired. If you're taking longer than that, usually you're overstimulated or there's something preventing you from falling asleep. So the challenge I would propose to people is that I don't think I'm going to convince you to just add another hour if you're only getting 6 hours of sleep. But what I would challenge somebody to do is give yourself the time for sleep that you actually are asleep. Don't just block this time off and assume, oh, I blocked off 7 hours for sleep, I'm getting 7 hours. Think about how long it actually takes you to fall asleep and give yourself that extra 15 minutes. And maybe from there, you can start building out a little bit more time to maybe get those 7 hours. But I would say the first step is try to give yourself that extra 15 minutes of actual sleep time, not just I'm going to block off 7 hours in my calendar for sleep.
I really appreciate hearing that because we know sleep is good for us, right? Similarly to how we know drinking more water is good for us or eating those vegetables or, whatever it might be. But you just made it so accessible for us. And I appreciate that because like we don't have to jump from 5 to 8 hours like tonight. And then when we don't do that, beat ourselves up for it. You're saying that we can start small and start planning ahead for maybe giving ourselves that 15 minutes where it might take us to fall asleep.
Mhm.
And then building into over time, which is, what we talk about here on this podcast, building habits that are going to help us over a long period of time to have a better health span in general. So thank you so much. That was a great answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. And thank you for all of your information and teaching and for just joining us here today. It was an absolute pleasure talking to you, Michael.
Yeah, I was glad I had fun.
And thanks to all of you for listening at home. Make sure to like and follow us on Facebook and Instagram, as well as subscribe to us on YouTube.
Yes, and we want to hear from you. So if you have comments or questions about anything that we discussed today, please feel free to list those in the comments, or you can reach out to us on our socials also. We look forward to being with you again next time. Thanks for joining us.